Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel on community action for peace and the environment, how Rotarians can understand threats and create solutions. My name is Jessica. I'm the Outreach and Development Officer for the Institute for Economics and Peace. And today we're joined by four amazing panelists, Rebecca, Michael, Keith, and Lorena, who will share their insights on this topic. Also, thank you to Summer Lewis, the Partnership Coordinator for IEP and Rotary, for helping organize this event. It's really great to see everyone's faces in this meeting format, but I do ask that you keep yourselves muted until the end of the session for Q&A. Summer will also be helping monitoring your questions in the chat box as well. So I'm going to start by passing the mic actually to Rebecca Krall, who is the Peacebuilding and Conflict Prevention Area of Focus Manager with Rotary International. And she's here to kickstart this wonderful conversation over. So Rebecca, to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. So I'm really going to take the least amount of time today, and I'm just going to kick us off with a brief reminder, introduction to the partnership, what we've been doing, and just some thoughts about, what this time calls for, not only with peace building, with the other projects and the areas of focus that we're working on. So as many of you probably know, the Rotary strategic partnership with the Institute for Economics and Peace was launched in 2017. And it's one of just 3 strategic partnerships that we have at the Rotary International level. And our partnership work really surrounds the concept and the framework of positive peace. So today we're not necessarily going to get into depth in positive peace, but I like to think about it as moving beyond the absence of war and the absence of conflict into building sustainable peace within communities, which is what Rotary is dedicating itself to do. What makes the partnership with the Institute so successful is surprisingly really our differences. So the Institute for Economics and Peace focuses on empirical research on peace and peacefulness, whereas Rotary's key strengths really lie in our ability to convene and mobilize communities both locally and globally. So merging the research and analysis of the Institute with the grassroots mobilization from Rotary is a potent force for creating good in the world. And we really try to do this through three major avenues. The first is that we are educating our communities through our membership that peace building is not just a one-time result or action. Peace building is a process and it is a system. And this means that when we work on peace and when we apply the peace building lens to our other projects, we're thinking about how to engage communities over the long term and building platforms for ongoing connection, dialogue, and communication. We are building capacity within Rotary and within our communities to think about peace building and our areas of focus. And today's conversation is a perfect example of that. So of course, through this partnership, we're working within the peace building and conflict prevention area of focus. But the positive peace framework creates a lens in which we can think about development and implementation of our projects across all areas of focus. And then in order to do this, we provide a number of different educational resources in order to move these initiatives forward. And Summer is going to provide the link to these resources if you're curious to learn more in the chat box today. So what have we done since 2017? I think it's right now seems like a good moment for reflection on a number of different things. But in terms of the partnership, we have trained over 90 Rotary members, Rotary Peace Fellows, and Rotarians as positive peace activators. And I see some here on the call today. So this is a competitive process where we are selecting groups of activators in regions around the world. And so far in North America, South America, and Europe, These 90 positive peace activators have turned around and worked with over 50,000 individuals to educate and further train them on the framework of positive peace. Rotary and the Institute have also held multiple large-scale positive peace workshops through global grants that have impacted the lives of almost 30,000 individuals in conflict-affected areas, both in Africa and Latin America. We've had 2,500 Rotary members and Rotaractors complete our online Positive Peace Academy. If you have not done so, we will send you the link today. And we've had over 100 articles and posts regarding the partnership that has been read by over 2 million people. So aside from these statistics, it also feels that we are just gaining such incredible momentum around this partnership and this movement in educating and engaging positive peace, both within the organization and within communities. And I think we can all agree that we are living through a time that we have so many challenges facing our world that require deep collaboration and dialogue at every level of local and global governance. So why is this conversation today so important? No matter what our thoughts are on the solutions to our environmental threats, it is a phenomenon that our generation, our children's generation, and their children's generation are going to have to contend with. And over the last decade, we've seen that we are living through not only a crisis of our climate, but also a crisis of cooperation. None of the problems we are seeing in this century will be able to come to any resolution without significant changes and improvement to dialogue, mutual understanding, and peace. So through the partnership, what we are trying to do, and in collaboration with everyone on this call, is we are trying to use the framework of peace building and positive peace as an educational tool and a framework that communities can use to find lasting solutions to incredibly complex problems. So this conversation today, yes, is it about the environment and environmental threats, but it's also about deep thinking around how we can come together as citizens from all over the world to act at the local and global level, how we can relate to each other and come together as a community to find solutions to these complex problems. So I'm going to end there and hand it back over to Jessica to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. So next, I'd like to introduce Michael Collins, the Executive Director of the Americas at the Institute for Economics and Peace, who's going to present IEP's newest report, the 2021 Ecological Threat Register, an index that looks at the relationship between ecological risk, peace, and resilience at the global, national, and subnational level. As Rebecca mentioned, these findings will be really helpful in understanding the issues at hand and as well as finding those solutions. So Michael, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, everybody. I'm just going to quickly go ahead and share my screen here. Excellent. So as Jessica just mentioned, sort of the aim of the Ecological Threat Register is essentially to be able to kind of sort of combine or otherwise compare countries and nations and communities' exposure to a variety of different ecological threats to their underlying levels of social resilience as measured by IEP's Positive Peace Index and the Positive Peace Framework that Rebecca was making reference to early on. This is the second year that we've actually done this. And it kind of sort of builds on some of the experiences and some of the kind of sort of processes that we have developed over time through products such as the Global Peace Index and the Positive Peace Index, as well as others. It covers 178 countries, which pretty much accounts for the entirety of the world's population. And we use 5 different indicators that we normalize on a scale of 1 to 5 to make them comparable. There are 3 indicators that are largely related to resource scarcity, which would kind of sort of consider one of the key domains, and that's rapid population growth, water risk, and food risk. And then a couple of other domains somewhat tied to this related to natural disasters and temperature anomalies, temperature rises, temperature spikes. Now, to share with you really kind of sort of the top level findings, which we'll delve into in a bit more detail. The first one is primarily one of the things that really comes out strongly throughout this report is the deep, 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 intimate and cyclical connection that exists between ecological degradation and levels of conflict around the world. So, for example, 11 of the 15 countries with the worst ETR scores are countries that are currently in conflict. And 28 out of the 30 countries with the worst ETR scores are in the bottom half of the global peace index. On the sort of the flip side of that, no countries with high levels of positive peace have a low ETR score. Afghanistan, which has been the least peaceful country for a number of years now, in both of these reports, has also been the country with the highest ecological threat score, just to kind of sort of round that key finding home. The second sort of large element related to the report and this work is just to note that the key drivers, right, these key indicators that we were looking at previously are deteriorating largely throughout the world. And that is a shift in trends, I should say. So, levels of malnutrition, food insecurity, and population growth, these are all rising, especially in some of the most stressed countries, invariably in countries that are already in conflict or very close to it. In fact, what the report does, and we'll be sort of sharing the specific list of the countries here, is identify 30 countries that have very low levels of resilience, very low levels of positive peace, as well as very high exposure to ecological threats. These countries are already home to over 1 billion people and expecting a significant increase in population over the next 30 years. Sub-Saharan Africa is the region that not only has the countries most at risk, but is also the least resilient of all regions worldwide. And then lastly, just to note that sort of ecological threats are independent from climate change, but climate change acts as an aggravator. I kind of sort of hope that makes sense. My point is that, these ecological threats that we're going to be talking about today exist independently on their own from climate change, but climate change does come in and can and will and is aggravating the situation significantly. And the reason I'd like to touch on, or we'd like to touch on this as well, is because we issued a parallel brief to the Ecological Threat Report regarding perceptions of climate change. The primary finding in that particular brief is that the countries with the highest levels of emissions, whether that be in total or per capita, are actually some of the least concerned about climate change. So jumping straight into those things in slightly more detail here, we see that the overall number of food insecure people has risen significantly over the last year. This has been the largest annual increase on record, as you can see here. Since 2015, we've actually seen a progressive deterioration in food insecurity. It had been improving prior to that. And as you can see here, from sort of a 1% annual deterioration to a 4% deterioration in 2020, COVID-19 had a significant impact on food security throughout the world. Now, the vast majority of food insecurity occurred in 3 regions: South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South America. Now, if we look at the number of undernourished people, which is kind of sort of a proxy of food security, but undernourishment is when the lack of food actually starts to have a physical impact on people, right? So this is actually a very, very direct metric. Although we see very much the same kind of sort of progress, from an improvement to a deterioration, and significantly more so on the last couple of years. And in terms of future prospects, and one of the things that I should have mentioned at the beginning is that what we try and do with Ecological Threat Register is try and project what the situation will be or what the outcomes will be up to 2050, up to the next 30 years. We do expect food insecurity to increase significantly, over 40% over the next 30 years, affecting up to 3.4 billion people. The global demand for food is going to increase significantly, over 50% from its current levels. And essentially, more than half of the people in the planet will be residing in the 40 least peaceful countries. These are countries that in many ways are also food insecure, have water risk, and high population growth as well. The 10 countries with the highest resource scarcity all projected, in fact, to increase their population by over 50%, aggravating very much the situation. These are the actual 11 countries that are going to be doubling their population over the next 30 years. The majority of these are located in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this is a last slide to kind of sort of correlate or to sort of show the connection between levels of peacefulness worldwide and population growth as well. Now, I don't want to sort of oversimplify the issue in any way in terms of, oh, well, if we just make more peaceful, it will fix population growth, or alternatively, if we fix population growth, things will become more peaceful. Rather, is to kind of sort of show again that deep correlation that exists between elements related to resource scarcity around the world and conflict, and of course, the subsequent impact of climate change now and in the future. So this is kind of sort of a mud map of these overall levels of exposure that countries have to ecological threats. You may see that this map is slightly more granular than some of the maps we've presented in the past, and that's because this year we were able to collect data from 2,500 administrative units around the world, offering a sort of a deeper level of granularity. Now, one of the things that you'll see generally is that areas such as Europe, North America, and South America are some of the regions least exposed to these ecological threats, whereas the MENA region, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia are countries with the highest levels of exposure. Excuse me. In the case of Afghanistan, that is the country with the highest level or the highest exposure to ecological threats. All 34 administrative units in Afghanistan are extremely, have an ETR score of high or extremely high. 87% of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa actually also have that score as well. These are the countries with the highest levels of exposure. These are all countries that have very high levels of food insecurity or food risk and water risk as well. Madagascar is perhaps the only one that has a slightly lower level of water risk. And all of these countries, with the exception of Pakistan, are expected to significantly increase their population over the next 30 years. Now, until now, we've kind of sort of talked about the exposure element, right? And one of the things that the Ecological Threat Register tries to do, in fact, the main aim of this is to compare that exposure countries' underlying level of social resilience. And I noted before that we use the Positive Peace Index for this. So, you know, think of it as kind of taking that previous map that you saw and then just laying it simply on top of this map here to be able to identify which are the countries that are most exposed and most vulnerable given their low levels of resilience. So when we actually do that, these are the 30 countries that we would see that have the lowest levels of resilience and the highest exposure to ecological threats. Now I'm going to list them here. Now, one of the things that I should note about the Ecological Threat Register this year is that there are a number of countries that are exposed to a variety of different ecological threats. But this didn't take into consideration some countries that have very low levels of resilience and are perhaps exposed to one ecological threat. However, that ecological threat is extremely, extremely severe. So that is taken into account in this year's Ecological Threat Register. And this is why we talk here about a catastrophic score, right? So in the case of Afghanistan, for example, in fact, in the case of Afghanistan, this 5 here applies to all of the different ecological threats. But you know, in other cases, this here would be the main threat for that particular country. Now, one of the things I wanted to note on the tail end of this is the PPI rank, standing for their level of positive peace, and their GPI rank, standing for their level of negative peace or current levels of peacefulness. And as you can see, once again, reinforcing this connection between high exposure to ecological threats and levels of conflict, you can see that all of these countries have low levels of resilience and low levels of peacefulness as well. And a couple of things to note, for example, if you were to look at Equatorial Guinea, it has a significant positive peace deficit. In other words, its level of peacefulness in the world is actually not that bad currently. But not only is it highly exposed to water risk, but it also has very weak institutions and low levels of social cohesion that could put it at risk in the future. So in terms of kind of sort of what we can expect to see, and I'm sorry not to bring sort of terribly optimistic news, although I hope to end on an optimistic note, that, you know, we do expect ecological threats to lead to a significant increase in conflict, even failed states in some cases, and significant displacement, in particular in the hotspot countries that we talked about today. We talked about a significant portion of the population being in these countries, and the proportion of the overall population will increase significantly over the next 30 years. Now, displacement now is at an all-time high, right? Nearly 90 million people are currently displaced. Of the 34 million people displaced from their home nation, in other words, not taking into account the internally displaced people, 68%, nearly 70% came from hotspot countries. Now, I just wanted to turn the attention to perceptions of climate change, and this is a brief parallel to the ETR, as I noted, but also deeply connected for the obvious reasons. And I wanted to share some of the key findings. And this was based on the World Risk Poll done by the Lloyd's Register Foundation as part of the Gallup World Poll. And it covered 142 countries, 150,000 people. And it was based on the question, do you think that climate change is a very serious threat to the people in this country in the next 20 years? Now you can see the regional breakdown here. Overall, 48% of the countries covered had more than 50% of the people that perceived climate change as a very serious threat over the next 20 years. As I noted in the beginning, some of the most significant emitters of CO2 are countries where the citizens are least concerned about climate change. Now, none of the four greatest emitters, China, the US, India, and Russia, had more than 50% of people concerned about climate change being a major risk in the next 20 years. China in particular had very low levels of concern, 23%. The largest emitters per capita also had low levels of concern overall. Those are mostly Middle Eastern countries, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar. The three countries who are the top 15, both for overall emissions and also for per capita emissions, are Canada, the United States, and Australia at 56, 49, and 52%. There are several countries that are in conflict or immediate post-conflicts that show low levels of concern, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen being some examples of that. And on the flip side of that, and to note here in this particular slide, South and Central America are the regions showing the highest concern, although I should note that this extends to other Spanish-speaking countries as well, including Spain and Portugal. So in terms of kind of sort of what are the potential implications of some of this information, there's a few things that I'd like to note, some of which is based on IEP's experiences, some of which is based on a number of policy seminars that we held immediately after the launch of the Ecological Threat Register last year. And that is, you know, in terms of being able to more effectively tackle ecological threats, we feel that it's important that there's an exploration about creating agency structures that are built more around systems thinking. When we think about things like the UN, for example, although we tend to think of it as systemic because it involves many, many different countries, the actual internal processes are very hierarchical in nature, and they're very linear in nature as well. And one of the reasons that I think that this is especially relevant to Rotary is given Rotary's 7 areas of focus, right? Because there is an opportunity to be able to look at all of these different areas of intervention and to be able to evaluate this systemically on a country by country basis or a region by region basis as well. I think actually Rotary is marvelously positioned to be able to maximize the various different areas in which the organization and the individual members work. The second thing, or the second recommendation, if you will, would be the sort of the amplification of the solutions to ecological problems that generate income. So when we think of government income, right, when we think of what governments, you know, government as kind of sort of the main investment framework, only 15% of the world's GDP actually comes or goes to government. So there's 85% of the world's GDP that is either in big pension funds or individual or in obviously the possession of individuals. One of the things that we think is really important to do, or there's an opportunity to do, is to really leverage the existing entrepreneurship that exists at a local level. And we noted that there's a distinct gap between very large investments at the government level and microfinance as well. So, investments go from $5 million to $500 million for the government level. And then in microfinance, they'd go from, $20 to $100, but around the $5,000 or the $50,000 mark, which is great seed funding to be able to get businesses related to food security and water security underway, there's currently a gap. The third thing is community-led approaches, and we're going to be learning more about this today. And, you know, in many ways, this is better ways of, and it is something that has been talked about extensively, but as an international community, we still very much fail to do. We still are not able to be able to leverage the strength, to be able to leverage the skills and the local knowledge that is so important for developing sustainable solutions. Excuse me. And then to build on successful programs. I mean, globally, there are a number of programs that stand out. FMNR, Farmer Managed Natural, FMNR, Natural Regeneration, I apologize, is one of the programs, for example, that has had significant positive impact in a number of different countries, albeit it needs to be contextualized in every case. But there are a number of significant and successful programs that can be built upon. And part of this leads me to wonder whether there has been, you know, a sort of an official mapping within Rotary in all of the areas of focus of what are the most successful programs, both large and small, and what are the ones that could be leveraged in a more significant way. And then lastly, perhaps we'll be touching less on this today, is the aspect of positive peace, using the positive peace framework to be able to develop solutions that can not only directly tackle elements related to food security and water stress, but can also find ways of incorporating elements that help increase social resilience to be able to deal with a variety of different crises over time. We're going to be hearing a bit more about that from our panelists today. So that pretty much brings it to a close, and yeah, look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your presentation. Moving on, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Keith Madden, the Environment Area of Focus Manager at Rotary International. Welcome, Keith. I'm really excited to just start this kind of discussion with you. So the environment is Rotary's newest area of focus. And one thing that Michael mentioned is that, you know, climate change not only affects the environment, but also conflict, food risk, water risk, and migration, and kind of this cyclical relationship. Any reflections on those connections between climate and those types of risks?
Sure. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, the IEP report that Michael described, it really puts in some concrete terms this connection of how climate affects both kind of the human community's ability to adjust to a certain range of variation that may have been normal in the past, and also how it affects you know, kind of the rest of the natural community, if you will. So on the one hand, you know, the temperature and precipitation anomalies associated with climate change that many parts of the world are already experiencing, that is difficult for communities to adapt to because it's, you know, they're outside of a normal range. But nature itself is also experiencing this. You know, in temperate regions of the world, we may have wildlife-rich areas in a national park, let's say, who may over time need to move farther north and might find that there's farmland where habitat used to be, or they might not have protected areas where they will want to migrate. So, you know, we also have things like algal blooms and other impacts to the natural environment that are anticipated with climate change. So when that happens, not only are humans directly affected, but the support systems that kind of nature and its cycles normally maintain for thriving human communities are also affected. So these support systems, here referring to kind of clean water, environmental services that support healthy soils and agriculture and things like that, whether they are sabotaged during an existing conflict or whether they're impacted by climate change, when those support systems for humanity take a hit, that is something that sets off this kind of cyclical pattern of ecological degradation and conflict that Michael was referring to, which has been described by ecological economists like Joan Martinez Alier as ecological distribution conflicts. So this is where the way kind of the costs and benefits of the environment are distributed is leading to further conflict. So, and you know, we know historically that many human communities and whole cultures kind of have developed geographically around patterns of nature, periodic floods of rivers, availability of clean water and growing seasons and such. So in this context, in this world we now live in, where these kind of fundamental patterns of nature are going to become a little bit more irregular, the IEP report really highlights this centrality of having a strong sense of community to build resilient communities to really be able to handle these types of disruptions. So in different parts of the world, local communities, not everyone has the option of just getting up and leaving and giving up hope if there's environmental disruption. And it's really in the mutual interest, both of people who care about human well-being and the environment, that we have healthy, empowered human communities who are both resilient and are able to kind of organize to manage their natural resources. That's going to be beneficial for nature, and and the human communities have an interest in making sure those support systems stay, don't take a further hit. So this is a really kind of timely conversation for civil society organizations like Rotary. I think people involved in organizations like Rotary are well placed to contribute to these types of dialogues and actions to start to deal with questions of adaptation and community resilience. Because people like Rotarians, for example, they're used to looking and assessing community need and figuring out ways to respond.
Thank you so much, Keith. I really appreciated that kind of perspective in terms of looking at both nature and sort of the human issues that the ETR focuses on. I think those are really important when looking at, the impact of the environment as a whole. But for those who might not be familiar with the work of the environment area of focus, what are some of the activities or initiatives this area takes on to kind of address those situations?
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who aren't fully familiar, Rotary recently launched the new environment area of focus, and the way initiatives and projects in Rotary's environment work take place in conjunction with local Rotary clubs is really locking into large-scale environmental issues, but starting from the grassroots. So Rotary clubs are starting at the local level, working on environmental issues that are important to them in a way that may connect with a larger national or international scale global challenge, such as climate change adaptation or biodiversity loss on a larger scale. And within this, it's important that we don't forget about what is a very important part of this area of focus is this sustainable livelihood approach. So in addition to kind of tackling some of these large scale challenges such as biodiversity and climate change, based on sound science, of course, and through a scientific approach, we also, through that process, want to give community participants, the tools to respond to a changing environment and pilot lifestyles that have a lower ecological footprint. So we know that certain livelihoods that are not totally sustainable are part of the reason why humans get into some environmental problems in the first place. So it can be very empowering to pilot more sustainable strategies as a way out of those issues and as a problem-solving mechanism. So many of these types of approaches are not totally unfamiliar to Rotary members. A lot of Rotary projects are used to working with communities at this local level. So what the environment area of focus is adding is a deeper focus on the supports, these kind of support structures of communities. And when we're in the problem-solving process, a lot of the environment projects are kind of stretching out the time horizon. So we're not focusing only on a short-term solution, but even if we're looking at basic human needs such as food and water, we're looking at, projects that instead of just let's assure a water source for the immediate future in this one site, how can we, look at a map, see where the water source, through ecological functions is located that is providing the water for these communities? What actions can we take to protect the habitats that allow for a consistent flow of clean water upstream, let's say, and make human life downstream more possible? In the case of food, efforts focus on diversifying food systems so that they are more resilient. Even going so far upstream, if you will, to talk about pollinators and pollinating species that allow for a certain level of food production that a lot of humans kind of take, we kind of take for granted a lot of these underlying ecological functions that allow for staple crops to be produced at the level that the world is consuming. And even if we talk about kind of basic social keys to successful societies, even questions of local governance and international law and human rights are very, very linked to the environment. So in some regions of the world, for example, a lot of the environmental degradation actually just comes from a lack of adequate enforcement of environmental laws, or a lack of respect for human environmental rights for indigenous communities, for example, who are tend to be very strong stewards of local environments. So we may have some great environmental laws on the books in some countries, but if we're not looking at kind of having an effective dialogue about making sure that everyone's rights are respected and that these laws are applied equally and fairly to everyone involved, we're missing opportunities to solve a lot of environmental problems as well. So really, whether we're looking at the strong kind of scientific basis of system science, some of the results from the IEP report that back up how these things are connected, or even whether we're talking to people at a local community level, when we put these pieces all together, it starts to become quite clear that we can't tackle these kind of basic human necessities and the needs that may arise related to those without also talking about environmental challenges and kind of building the strong social ties in order to have environmental dialogue about natural resources management and avoiding pollution and such.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. So my last question for you kind of looks to the future and thinks about, how Rotarians can take advantage of all of this great work. So what are you most excited about with this area of focus? What are you looking forward to from Rotarians in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot to be excited about. When you start to think about all the possibilities, and in my case, since being a part of Rotary, really seeing the ingenuity in the minds of Rotarians from all different parts of the world. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting proposed initiatives and projects, and I think the environment, really provides this additional opportunity for greater impact that Rotarians can take by addressing kind of some of these the environmental and social aspects of community needs at once, and really just thinking about the fact that the environment as a kind of a subject matter area, it's something that by nature cuts across boundaries, right? So you have in the kind of biodiversity field, you have migratory species that are popping up in multiple countries every year that really can tie people together from different cities, from different countries. There are common ecoregions that are shared between multiple countries, common pollution issues that are shared. So the environment is kind of this natural space for people to connect across borders. And what kind of better connecting mechanism is there than Rotary for people to come together and dialogue about these things and find ways to solve some problems, whether it's talking about peace parks, transborder conservation, or common environmental issues that they are seeing in different parts of the world. So I think it's a very exciting moment, and very happy to have some of the lessons learned from the Institute of Economics and Peace about how to go about some of these challenges.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Keith, for all of your insight. So I'd like to transition and introduce our next speaker, Lorena Rodriguez. Lorena, I'm really excited that you're here because we have a lot we can learn from you. Lorena, you're both a Rotary Peace Fellow as well as a positive peace activator. Not only that, but you currently work with women and rural communities in Colombia practicing regenerative agriculture. So I'd love to know more about your organization and specifically how your background kind of shaped the way you work in this space.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today. It's a pleasure for me to be talking to you from my house, which is located in what was originally Maidu Native American land or territory, and today is referred as Roseville, California. So very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, I am a Peace Fellow. I studied in Japan for 2 years. I graduated in 2019. And during my fellowship, I did field work in my home country in Colombia. And my experience led me to get more interested in the relation between conservation, food sovereignty, and peace building. And since then, I founded an NGO called La Realidad. And we do projects, different projects that aim at conservation and rejuvenate the soil, create a regenerative agriculture. And the most important part of our work is that we are trying to revalue the native foods that grow in the Amazon belt, because La Realidad is located at the foothills of the Amazon in Colombia. Why are we doing this? So believe it or not, we are based where we are based, which is a very fertile region. Much of the food that the people consume there is imported. So we deal with that. We deal with a lot of deforestation as a result of cattle farming and monoculture. And just as like the Ecological Threat Report talks about the importance of food security, that's an important theme and issue for us at La Realidad. So what we are hoping is that our farms in Putumayo, Colombia, will serve as a model for the region for producing food and wellness in a way that is beneficial for the ecosystems and for the humanity. And for instance, what we do is that in 3 years of operation, we have converted a conventional cacao orchard to 100% organic production of cacao. Cacao is the fruit that if you harvest it, fermented, drain it, grind it, and so you have chocolate out of it. So we have now 100% cacao or organic cacao orchard. We are growing an edible forest using techniques of permaculture and regenerative agriculture. And the most important part also of our work, which this doesn't make sense if we don't share knowledge with the local people. And just last week, we finished our workshop on how to make compost that will rejuvenate the soil. And we had important conversations with the local farmers about the importance of nourishing the soil, because the soil holds all these little tiny beings, which are actually incredible. We are actually the food of those tiny beings. So, like rejuvenating the soil is a very important part of fighting against this climate crisis.
Thanks so much, Lorena. That's really amazing work. And I know you mentioned how the work kind of addresses food insecurity, as mentioned in the Ecological Threat Register. But is there anything else that you'd want the audience to kind of take away from the findings of the report?
Yeah, so as IP has stated, we cannot talk about peace without understanding the systemic violence that keeps perpetuating conflict, and as a result, perpetuating more violence. And I appreciate the emphasis that the Ecological Threat Report puts on food insecurity. I think that IP did a great job of making it more obvious that conflict and food security are intrinsically related. It's been like that for many, many decades. And this is just making it more clear to us, right? And I think that we have to be very careful between the difference between correlation and causation. Like, and I can talk a little bit more about that for later. So after you see the report, the question is, so what is behind the lack of food security, right? If you actually look at the report, you see that hunger is more prevalent in communities that are largely agricultural. In other words, the people who is producing our food is the people who is suffering hunger, right? So you see that dynamic, and then you ask, hey, what's going on? There are a lot of answers for that question. I truly believe, and after the work I've been doing for many years, researching and doing our practical work with La Realidad, I think that this is due to an unsustainable global food economy that, of course, prioritizes profit over feeding people. So this current food industry relies on techniques that, such as monoculture, pesticides use, predatory loans for farmers, control over seeds, displacement of people from their lands and territories. The system that we are right now, that this broken system that we are in right now, prevents farmers from choosing what they want to grow, how they want to grow it, how much they have to sell it for. Because what you see, especially in Putumayo, and that is the Amazon, right, is a lot of farmers who are in debt, taking more and more loans to be able to pay for the pesticides they use in their land, and all their crops going to the same, buyer who set up the price of their food. So they're basically relying on the global system that, as we just we're trying to come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, and we realized that, there is something that it's not working here. I mean, and what I learned with La Realidad, and something that I appreciate also of the global of the report, is that we learned that humans are a creative force. We can do better, right? There is so many, if you look around at your local community, there are so many people, young people, doing really incredible work to fix this system at the local level. See a La Realidad, we are strengthening the local economy, prioritizing the food security of the people. We have an orchard of cacao. We have enough land to be able to produce a bunch of cacao and sell it to the National Federation of Cacao. But we don't choose to do that. We choose to diversify our crops. We choose to grow a small scale, prioritize the local consumption, trade with our local farmers, talk about, why it's important to diversify crops, why it's important to stop bringing more cattle that produces 40% of the green gases of the world. And we prioritize that. So humans are creating, we can do better, and we can get out of the illusion that someone is going to fix the system for us, and that someone is going to do something better and make the world perfect. No, La Realidad, we understand that we need to take responsibility of this world and of our own lives, starting with learning what we eat, where it comes from. And I just want to say, I'm not trying to say here that, we have to jump to a different economic system where we don't trade globally anymore. No, what I'm saying is we need to prioritize that the people that grow our food has food on their table every day. We need to close the gap between rural areas and the cities, because there is this belief that the cities is where the knowledge is located. But if you see at the rural areas, there is so much knowledge there that we actually at the cities we need to learn. So or what I'm not trying to tell you is go out there to your grocery store and start buying food that is labeled organic, gluten-free, no sugar. No, what I'm trying to say is support local. Go to your farmer's market, go to your local roaster, go and support people in the market that is trying to prioritize relationships over profit. I have a lot of friends who are roasters of coffee who know their producer. Go to the farms, go to the region, set up a different price, pay even more than the market for a smaller amount of coffee. You know, find those things, be interested, and go out there. And there's incredible people doing incredible work. So I think that, and just to finish, sorry, I'm going too long here, but I also think it is important that the report also take into account, you know, like things like, and I see a lot of people here from India, like Vandana Shiva, which is an excellent scientist and scholar, and I really admire her. She talks about this correlation between, you know, the overgrowing population and the climate crisis now, and she has an interested approach, because what she says, you know, when you take land, when you take people out of their land, that's when they need to secure. They don't have more than to sell their labor power. So when you take the land away from there, they need to secure that through labor, and that's why they start, you know, having more and more kids that are hopefully going to grow fast enough, and they're going to survive enough time that they can take care of their family. But when you leave people in the land, when you secure people their land, they don't overgrow. They already know how much population they need to have to keep growth, to survive. So I think that those other approaches to climate change and the crisis of food security have to take into account into these reports, where we see there is a lot of displacement of land. Yes, but this is from we can see a lot of displacement, for example, in El Salvador, in Central America. That was one of the cases that was studied in the report. Since, you know, 1940s, you know, when the big coffee regions arrived, with cotton arrived, indigo arrived, when they displaced indigenous peoples and farmers to, you know, make these big markers, crops, monocultures, and that changed the whole system and the ecosystem, and so I think that these reports provide us a lot of food for thought. I think there are a lot of important conversations that we need to have, but also always being careful between the correlation of, you know, conflict and ecological threats. One of the other, I don't think that one of the other cause the other. I think there is a correlation, but we need to explore further, really why, you know, where this correlation comes from, and I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for, you know, those really insightful and also powerful points. I think, you know, that added greatly to the conversation. I'm going to switch over now to the audience Q&A portion of, you know, this event. We'll close off for the next 30 minutes with audience Q&A. And I'd like to start by asking the first question, actually. This is to Rebecca and Keith, you know, one, taking into consideration what Lorena shared from her experience. But for a Rotarian or a club, you know, who is looking to start a project in this exact space at the intersection of peace and the environment, kind of what's the first step of action they should take? Rebecca, I'll pass it on to you first.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to everyone for sharing those thoughts. I could have jumped in at any point with so much, it was so much food for thought. It was just incredible. I mean, as we always like to say, we really encourage everyone that's trying to make a difference in a community to not go in with a pre-programmed idea. You really need to be talking with your community to see what's going on. And you might be very surprised with what issues surface from those conversations. So we can certainly say, you know, in communities that have, you know, food insecurity or are looking at issues of the environment or peace, that's fine, but we need to go talk to the communities and not assume that we know the solution. So that's always what we say, whether you're looking to do a global grant or a service-based project, is really speaking to the community and seeing what's going on. I think that Lorena's point of respecting the wisdom of the local groups is just incredibly important. It really is a humbling practice for people like us who are passionate and excited and want to help, but really we have to make sure that we are listening first and foremost. And I'll hand it over to Keith to see if he has anything to add.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Rebecca mentioned, which I think is really important in terms of kind of the approach of how you get involved in these types of concerns. I would just add that for Rotary clubs, for example, that don't really know where to begin, there's certainly the Ecological Threat Register report points out, what types of issues are most salient in different parts of the world, and provides a guide. And that, there are also, additional resources out there to really to look at places where the stakes are highest for people in the environment. But I think, like Rebecca said, once you identify where you would like to make a difference, I think it needs to start with a really kind of open conversation and see where the local community kind of goes with that, because as Rebecca said, the root problem may end up being different than what it initially seemed.
Mm-hmm. And since I have the mic, I'm just going to add one more thing. Coming from the peace building lens, and I mentioned this just in my earliest statement, is that the environmental problems that we're seeing are also issues of, it's a crisis of collaboration, being able to work together to find common solutions. So I think that we also need to address how we understand each other and how we work together, because there might be a very clear solution to an environmental problem or a health problem or an educational problem. But if communities cannot come together to work towards that solution, we've seen it all over the globe with increasing levels of polarization and anger, then solutions they won't be feasible. So really looking at that, what we call a conflict dynamic, to understand the communities in which you're working with to be able to make these solutions possible. And we also have resources that can help you use that lens for any project that you want to undertake.
Thank you both, Keith and Rebecca. So this next question is from Michael from Rudy Westervelt. And Rudy, if you're there, you are happy to come off of mute and join Michael in this conversation after he answers your question. But Michael, can we slow down population growth with mechanisms like education and literacy, or kind of these, cultural issues provide a large barrier to that?
So I mean, I think education and literacy is potentially part of it. But one of the points that I think, that I hope the Ecological Threat Register makes is really kind of sort of the systemic nature of this. And as such, education and literacy, only being one of those particular elements. I mean, when we think about cultural issues really in any society and in any civilization arise primarily out of basic necessity, out of need, right? So when we think of things like population growth, it's extremely correlated with child mortality, for example, right? And there's also cultural elements related to ensuring an income at older age. Other potential reasons may include, ensuring that there are enough family members to be able to manage the work, or to be able to sort of, to toil the land alternatively, right? So I think that there's a variety of different elements related to that need to be kind of sort of brought into place, largely related to economic opportunity in many respects.
I think, Michael, and kind of tag on that, please, the women's rights, and certainly a lot of these areas across Africa are not the same as in the Western world. And so on the education part, as well as you just touched on a little bit on economic development, empowering women and girls in that whole area, how would do you see that we could focus on that might be able to move the needle on some of these issues?
Well, I definitely think that is an extremely important thing to do. Absolutely. I think that, sometimes one of the dangers is that oftentimes what we tend to do is to kind of sort of not necessarily impose, but certainly kind of sort of think that a lot of the cultures, throughout the world are very similar to ours. And as such, the different sort of gender roles should apply in the same way that they would do for us, or that things in one country would apply in another. But in that sense, if the main role in any individual country is largely related to women in that sense, then of course that should be tremendously supported for sure.
Awesome. Thank you both, Michael and Rudy. The next question I have will be to the whole group, from Dennis Wong. So you're happy to kind of comment on this after I invite the whole group. But the question was, how should we hold ourselves responsible and accountable for both ecological threats and positive peace? I'd like to pass this question over to Lorena first.
Okay, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So how should we hold ourselves responsible and accountable for both ecological threats and positive peace?
Oh, okay. How we should hold accountable. Well, I think during my section, I share a little bit about on how can we do better. I think that first, what I say, if you take responsibility of of the ecological, of what are the systems that you are supporting in your everyday habits, and if you take that into account and hold that responsibility, and learn more. That's and make changes. I think that's a way. I mean, I just want to be clear, not everybody needs to be a farmer. I don't think everybody needs or should be a farmer. But if there's people that should be, in different parts of the network, right? If you are a farmer, if you're in the producer, because we all are related to food. If you are in different parts of the network, if you eat, or if you create knowledge, or if you support initiatives, I think that it is important to be aware of these things and realize that there is so much we need to learn of how the food network of the world works. I think that that's a way of holding ourselves accountable. I think that when we look more at policy making, just see at the results, like the people who is suffering hunger. Hunger is a phenomenon of rural areas. Question yourself about why. Question yourself, like, for example, I was just trying to think about El Salvador, right? Like a lot of the civil war, a lot of the conflict that has pushed so back, that have resulted in people moving in the aid of the 1980s to the US and coming back and creating the gangs violence. All of that is because people has been displaced from their land and to promote monocultures. So how much diversity we have in the world. This is a good way to hold ourselves accountable. How are we promoting diversity in everyday life? With the food we eat, with the people we talk, with the places we join, with the getting out of my comfort zone and go to spaces to listen and not necessarily to speak. how is that I'm embracing diversity? So that's on the local level, and in the national level, you know, how much money my country, my government is spending in diversifying things, not only in security, states, and military centered, not only in, you know, law enforcement, but maybe in education, maybe in health, it may be in supporting community gardens, it may be supporting young people who are working about research about how to reuse plastic in my community, support people who are not necessarily thinking and prioritizing one thing, but they're trying to diversify. So, and that's also a democracy, right? It's bringing to the peoples the right to eat and to have food in their table, to diversify their table, their food, their families. So I think that's a way we can hold ourselves accountable, see where the money of our government is put it, because, you know, the positive piece the report shows that, right? A lot of the money that is invested in the world is invested in law enforcement. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lorena. Keith, any thoughts?
Just kind of bouncing off of Lorena's ideas, I like this idea that starting local, but also getting out of your comfort zone can be compatible. So if we're thinking about issues of environment and peace, for example, I think when people want to start local, their first impulse naturally is talk to their neighbors and group together with people like them. But if there are, if some of you find that, hey, I'm trying to figure out what are the environmental issues in my area, and say, well, it seems like my family has access to a healthy environment, but what about people in my same city who might not have that same access? What about people in my same state who might not have access to the same food options that I do? And if environment issues are obvious in your immediate surroundings, then how can you find allies in adjacent areas to join together and start to have a better understanding and work on some of those issues? So I think there are ways to get out of your comfort zone at many scales, and I think that is certainly one way for all of us to kind of be consistent and responsible with environment and peaceful dialogue.
Thank you, Keith. Rebecca, I saw you nodding your head at what Keith was saying in the beginning, so I'll pass the mic over to you to answer that question.
Yes, I mean, I have so many thoughts on this, but I think that just in brief, two things. I think that in terms of peace building and also the environment to a certain extent, we live in our heads a lot, and we live in the theory, and we live, in what we can be doing. And peace is not really, excuse this word, like a sexy, fast thing that happens. It is a very long-term circular process that needs a lot of energy over a long period of time. But it also is hopefully very near and dear to everyone if we start locally. So I think in terms of the original question was like, how do we take responsibility for positive peace or the environment in our lives? And I think that more than anything, and I'll just talk about the United States, but this probably applies to many countries, across the world, we have to get back to community. We have to get back to working together and trying to find solutions instead of being pulled apart onto these poles. And Rotary is an organization that is so well placed to do this because of our connections over multiple different political, social, divisions. Rotary can work through these things to actually bring people together over a number of different, both challenges and expressions of celebration of what we are doing right and what we can, what are the things that we're doing well in our communities. And I know that Sharon Aston has her hand up here, but I actually wanted to use a project that she's working on, an example of how you could use an environmental project to actually bring a community together. Because some of the peace building initiatives that we need to see is not focusing on the political differences or the cultural differences. It's actually looking at what we have in common. So what do we have in common? We probably all want clean water. We probably all want healthy environments. We all want good schools for our kids. So how could we take, for example, a river cleanup, but make it a peace building project? Bring people together from different political views, from different social and economic backgrounds, and show each other where our commonalities are instead of our differences. This might sound difficult or even kind of silly, but it's actually exactly what we need right now. So those are my thoughts, and I'll hand it to someone else to express theirs.
Can I just say something, add a little something else, Jessica? Is Jessica there?
I don't know where Jessica went, but go ahead, Lorena.
Go for it.
Yeah, I also want to say, like, yeah, the looks at learning from the local community is so important. And la realidad, what we learned also is that, you know, there is the capacity of Earth to feed us is incredible. We have the Earth it has so much potential, not to feed only 10 billion of people, but 14 billion of people. You know, we just need to diversify, and I think that a Rotary has two ways that is clearly helping or could help that this happen. One is like what you mentioned, Rebecca, about supporting projects that are local. Supporting projects that I'm providing these different initiatives, but also a lot of what I gained, it was the time during my fellowship to research and to go deeper and to have those spaces and that support to make questions, to trying to solve it, to put it to calm the theory and put it into practice in your project and learn, because this is a two-way knowledge. You have the theory in your head, you put it in practice, you realize, no, they're like theory and practice, it like the practical work is kind of different. So you start this learning process that is infinite. I'm still working on it. I'm still learning more, and I'm grateful for it. You know, and then so Rotary, that's a great job by providing us with these scholarships for the fellowship, and also having this strategic partnership with IEP that provide us with more tools to analyze and see deeper these correlations. No causation, correlations of ecological threats, conflict, resilience, and also providing, supporting, creating local projects at the local level, like La Realidad and other projects that are doing a great work on that. So I think that those two lines of work that Rotary is working are very, very important, and I'm grateful for that too.
Thank you so much, Lorena.
Could I say something, Rebecca? It's Sharon. Could I say something?
Hi, Sharon, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you, Rebecca, for referring to our project, our peace project in Ethiopia. And we're very thankful for Salvador Rico for leading us in these world river cleanings that are going on. But I wanted to refer back to IEP's Ecological Threat Register. And as you see, it's the sub-Saharan Africa area that has the most threat and risk. That happens to be, I'm from the Rotary Club of Addis Ababa West in Ethiopia. And if you look at, food security is the item that IEP has listed. You look at the number of refugees that are in these countries. I mean, Turkey has the highest number of refugees. Ethiopia has over 1 million refugees. Kenya has one of the largest refugee camps. All throughout Africa, nobody ever talks about the number of refugees that Africa's taking in. We always hear Europe can't take 5,000 more, or, you know, the US took in 85,000. But all of these refugees are coming from Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, all of the countries that the West has gone into and caused disturbances. You know, somehow we need to raise our collective voice for peace as Rotarians, because a lot of the damage that we're facing ecologically, food security, flooding, we can't go and look at the normal 8 pillars of peace that IEP professes, because we're so busy doing other things to protect our countries, to house refugees. You know, Ethiopia, we have about 2 to 3 million internally displaced people right now. That's either because of conflict or flooding or food scarcity. And if we had a chance to look solidly at these 8 pillars of peace, we could alleviate a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the world. And I think there's a lot more that Rotary can be doing to raise their voice about these actions that are causing so many issues. And the other thing I wanted to talk about with food security is the likes of Monsanto and Pioneer, who have their suicide seeds. You know, generally a farmer would plant his crop and a third would go to feed the family, a third would go for the cattle, and a third would go to plant for the following year. Well, with suicide seeds, these crops die every year, and the farmer now has to go out and buy more seeds, and they have to buy the fertilizer that actually goes with these seeds. So we need to do a lot with these seeds that are being given to African countries. And Ethiopia is a danger spot because Ethiopia is the home of the original seed source. So if you want to look at where the original wheat seed came from, where the original coffee bean comes from, where the original rapeseed is the foundation of canola oil, which is Canada's second largest cash crop. It comes from Africa. And we need to look at these things to protect our original seed source, so that when, you know, we get stem rust wheat disease in the West here, we have original seed to go back to. And that's why these seed banks in Africa that are buried deep within the ground are so important to us. And we need to look at all these things in the scheme of peace. And I just like to say that, you know, we're going to host a webinar on October 24th, which is UN Day, with Rotaractors and youth around the world, not to celebrate the UN, but to say, what is the missing piece in the UN, which is youth? And we need to bring youth back to their original purpose that was designed in 1943 when Rotary established the values on which the UN is founded. That youth saved us from the war in 1945, and they are there going into the future to guarantee that peace is stabilized in the future. And we need to see our youth, our Rotaractors, at the UN table, where they've rightly been given a position for decision-making in the UN Security Council. So I'd really like to emphasize that we need to have our youth voice raised in the pursuit of peace. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So I think we have time for one more question, and this is to Rebecca and Keith from Michelle Shermer. So I'm going to read out what she had written in the chat. In Rotary's fight against polio, we've utilized not only fundraising, but advocacy, as well with the Polio Eradication Advocacy Task Force and other methods. So how important is advocacy in our areas of focus, whether it's fighting diseases like polio or fighting to protect the environment? And what role can club members play without getting too political? And Michelle, if you're there, I invite you to unmute yourself and kind of respond to Rebecca and Keith's response.
Keith, do you want me to begin, or would you like to start off this one?
You can start.
Okay. Yeah, I think advocacy is it's a little bit tricky in terms of like that line where, you go into the political, and I'll just be totally honest. I think that peace building is trickier than other areas. No one, almost no one, I guess nowadays you can kind of argue this with the different opinions on the COVID crisis, but almost no one disagrees on polio eradication or measles eradication or smallpox eradication. But when you have two groups of people that are in a conflict, and what the source of that conflict is and who's right, it gets very, very complicated. So what I think advocacy leadership, like community leadership, is also another term I like to use. I think it's very important, but I'd like to encourage everyone to think about, and I'm going to refer back to the Positive Peace Framework. If you aren't familiar with it, please click on the links that Summer's going to provide. It's a lot easier to be an advocate in prevention than it is to deal with the aftermath of a conflict or try to resolve it once it's started. So Rotary's deep strength and value add, we do have a role to play in bringing communities back together after a conflict, but the prevention piece is honestly where we are going to make the most work. And it's also sometimes the least congratulated, because how do you know if something never happened? But that is actually where we're going to find a different way of living both in harmony with each other and our planet.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think in the environment, the question of how to go about liaising or working with governmental actors is going to come up frequently, because a lot of environmental issues, right? A lot of these things come down to kind of public goods or common pool resources that are managed by a constituency as a whole. And the environment also is a sector that is often chronically underfunded. So it is sometimes, but not always, difficult to address environmental issues without somehow engaging governmental authorities. However, this sometimes may be at a municipal level, provincial level. But I think Rotarians, using, and I think it is possible to do so in most cases apolitically, when we're talking about something that is value to everyone at the table, when we're talking about environmental resources, environmental ecological services that everyone benefits from. But I think, if they're taking the right approach, I think Rotarians should also not be afraid to engage with government ministries, UN departments, international development institutions, like regional development banks or the World Bank. They are managing, who are managing such a large portion of funding that is affecting environmental outcomes, both positive and negative. So, but I would say, even starting just at the municipal level, if often there is public funding going into things such as agriculture, infrastructure, and sometimes it's not always going towards the most sustainable options. So if there is a way to at least start a dialogue, I think there's a way to go about that to make sure that whatever public actions are being taken or resources are being invested are moving us towards more sustainable options.
Well, I would just say thank you for both of you for answering that question. This has been a wonderful dialogue with everyone here. And yeah, I think Rotarians can use their voices within those parameters. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And so I want to thank everyone so much for attending this really wonderful session. I feel like there's a lot that we touched on that definitely we feel the need to go deeper in. So as we kind of, wrap up with a couple minutes left, I invite our panelists to kind of give us some rapid fire 1 minute reflections, any last minute thoughts that we'd want our audience to kind of take away as we kind of leave this session. So Michael, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, everyone. And I don't know, perhaps kind of sort of just building a bit on I suppose the last question, right? And Rotary's ability to be able to kind of sort of lead in many of these ways. I mean, I think the number one, Rotary is positioned uniquely to be able to do sort of advocacy at the global level. Even something as basic, and I say as basic, because of the fact that, with regards to perceptions to climate change, there is still a lot of work to be done. And then, of course, more directly, and entering an increasing level of complexity, if you will, issues related to sort of food security and water stress, but resilience more broadly as well. And also, Rotary, as you all know, is uniquely positioned as a doer, not only at a national level, but at a grassroots level as well. So through existing projects that have already been underway for a number of years, to new projects that will happen. And in addition to that, even very simple things such as being able to directly support initiatives such as the initiative that Lorena has, La Estación, and other similar initiatives that are doing absolutely fantastic work in this domain is something very easy to do, and it's something that will be very impactful indeed.
Thank you, Michael. Rebecca, over to you.
Yeah, I would just say that it really does feel like our globe is in a real time of immense change at this point. And I think that, without sounding too internally focused on my area, I think that peace building is actually one of the most critical areas that we can be working on alongside with the environment. Like I said before, and I'll say it again, nothing will happen, no progress can be made without cooperation. So both at the local level and at the global level. So I encourage you all just to think about that and how you can, in small or large ways, contribute to more collaboration and dialogue.
Thank you. And Keith, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just in that spirit, what Rebecca and Lorena have mentioned about knowledge sharing and cooperation, I would just encourage people to take those ideas into their approaches with the environment, and would especially encourage Rotary members to think about projects working with, for example, traditional and indigenous peoples who often are safeguarding different ideas on how to protect their environment, that they can bring new ideas to your community can share ideas with them. And I think that's a very kind of powerful and mutually empowering way to work on the environment.
Thank you so much. And Lorena, your final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll agree with everything that the other panelists already said. I just want to, remind everybody that knowledge is already there. And our ancestors and indigenous people have shown how seeds can adapt to new things, to new, changes of the weather. We just need to co-evolutionate with the seed and with nature. The knowledge is already there, and I think that it is important to remember that we don't need to create big things. We need to, what Rebecca said, just go to dialogue, sharing knowledge, questioning things that are out there, questioning like why the people that produce food is actually the ones suffering hunger, or why there are so places where when there is no drinkable water but there is a lot of soda. Why is going on with that? So I think questioning, providing spaces for dialogue, and of course support people in the food industry that is doing things differently, that is prioritizing relationships over profit, that are like roasting their own coffee, creating artisanal ways to provide food products, and of course people who is trying to promote diversification at a region, I think is very important. And for the policymakers, more conversations, more peace conversations, more dialogue, more of these webinars, and after that just go into a practical side of things. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lorena. And on behalf of all the panelists, we want to thank you for spending the past 90 minutes with us discussing, these really important topics. So all registrants will kind of get a recording of today's session. You have the links in the chat, but please do not hesitate to reach out with us for more questions, for more conversations. And I wish you all a great rest of your day or evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much from El Salvador. Take it easy.
Thank you very much from Syria.
Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much from Ethiopia.
Thank you very much from Argentina.
Thank you very much from Metapan, El Salvador.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you very much from India.
Thank you.
Who is from Metapan, El Salvador, please?
Israel Peraza.
Excuse me?
Israel Peraza.
Oh, my dear Mayor Siri from Metapan. He's my friend. We are working together for cleaning Ouija Lake in El Salvador. He is a very good job.
I know I was listening to you guys, and it's a very good conversation you had today.
Muchas gracias, amigos from Syria.
Oh, excelente in Spanish. Thank you so much.
Lo veo mañana, señor alcalde, en el Zoom de las 9.
Yo hablo español.
Wow, excelente.
Okay, I see you there.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Francisco,
Gracias.
no te olvides de mí.
No. Hola, José. Saludos
Mauricio.
a todos los amigos rotarios.
Mauricio, nos vemos mañana a las 9.
Salvador Germán habla.
Así es.
Un héroe de Ouija.
No, más o menos.
Le hubieras contado lo que hemos hecho en Ouija para que lo conozca Lorena, empoderando comunidades que disputan muchos problemas que tienen. Lo hablamos otro día, tal vez nos incluyen a Yo Limpio en el próximo webinar que haya. Jessica Duque, por favor, ahí quedan mis direcciones.
Mucho gusto.
Y
Nos
para
vemos
los que tenían la pregunta sobre traducción, esperemos tener una sesión en español en el próximo mes. Como ustedes están registrados, yo puedo compartir la información cuando ya tengamos fecha. Entonces, esto fue en inglés, pero habrá otra sesión en español.
Thank you, Summer. We consider that you must invite Guatemalan Rotarians.
Sí,
people.
sí, sí.
In Guatemala, there are many problems with the indigenous people.
Vamos a pedir ayuda en compartir la información. Lo que yo puedo compartir con las redes que tenemos, con SRAG y con todo, pero cuando comparto con ustedes, por favor, pido su ayuda en compartir con rotarios, rotarianos y las personas que quieras incluir. Con todo gusto. Está abierto a todos. La cuestión es compartir la información a veces.
Así es. Muchas gracias. Así lo haremos.
Perfecto.
Gracias, Summer.
Gracias a ustedes.
Bye, bye.
Creo que voy a cerrar la sesión, pero estamos en contacto. Muchas gracias a todos.
Success.
Gracias.
Bye, bye.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for coming.
Está bueno.